However, this issue was politicized in order to falsify the truth and later to prepare for the transfer of the Jews from Europe to other areas, or rather to Palestine. The Jews who came to Palestine are Khazar Jews from the east of the Caspian Sea. They were pagans who converted to Judaism in the 8th century. They immigrated to Europe and from there came to this region. They have nothing to do whatsoever with the ancient people of Israel. Shalom, Ka'ala Yahweh, Bashem Yashayah, Bashem Kokwadash. The Lord is my teachers, the apostles and elders of the great millstone. Peace and mercy to the elect, who are the house of David, reborn again in this generation. And shalom to the 1/3 Yashayah, who today are known as the Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, who before losing our true heritage were known as, and still are, the true Hebrew Israelites of the Holy Bible. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about what we just watched, that being the president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, revealing that the people in the land of Israel today, the Israelis, have no connection whatsoever to the biblical Jews, and that they are the Khazarians, which used to be in the area we know today as Ukraine, who were pagans and then eventually converted to Judaism after some political issues arose with their king and nation, which we'll get into in just a bit. But the whole point is that this truth is coming out, and the Lord is revealing Amalek being the true biblical name of the so-called Jew or the so-called Israeli. You see, they are the top tribe of the nation of Edom, making them Edomites, and specifically Edomites of the tribe of Amalek. You can simply just call them Edomites. The other Edomites in the world would be the rest of the Caucasian race, because you see, the Israelis in the land of Israel today, they also are Caucasians, but they shed that identity a long time ago, where the rest of the Caucasian race, they've slowly started to shed that identity little by little. But, I digress. Let's get back into this. Let's read this first, in fact, before we get more into this topic. This is Jeremiah 49:10. But I have made Esau bare. I have uncovered his secret places, and he shall not be able to hide himself. His seed is spoiled, and his brethren, and his neighbors, and he is not. And when it says here Esau, this is also talking about the descendants of Esau, okay? Because that's basically what it's talking about here, right? Those who descend from the lineage of Esau. Esau being the wicked twin brother of Jacob, right? Jacob and Esau were the twins that were birthed to Isaac, who was the chosen son of Abraham, okay? Well, back to what President Bashar al-Assad said, okay? This video, I didn't want to play the whole video because the very first part of it, it's fairly controversial. It's the truth, but you can't post it here on YouTube. It basically talks about the enemies of the small hatters during World War II, and it talks about how they didn't really lose the war. They just simply came over here to America. But if you want to watch the video, just simply type in Bashar al-Assad, Khazarian Jews, and you'll see the whole video. Now, the point being is we already knew that whole issue about World War II and how that was a maneuver for Amalek, right, the so-called Israelis, to get into the land of Israel. Because again, as he had said, let's go through what he mentioned, okay? He talked about how these were the Khazarian pagans who converted to Judaism around, or the 8th century, I should say. Well, when you get into the history of these people, and which we've been teaching, starting with the apostles and even all the way back to, our foreteacher, right, the high priest Abba Bivens, we've been telling the world that these guys are not the biblical Jews, that they are the biblical Edomites that would be prophesied to take over the world and also the Holy Land. Well, this is what he's talking about, okay? These Israelis, back in before 740 BC or AD, excuse me, they were in the land which, like I said, we know today as Ukraine. See, the Ukraine is like right here, like this area right here. This is Ukraine. Okay, kind of where the old Roman, Holy Roman Empire, which is where Germany is today, around this area, right? But the point being is, this is where Khazars used to be at. Okay, and they were surrounded by the remnants of the Roman Empire, which converted into two basic empires. That you had the Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire. Byzantine simply means backwards. And then you also had the Holy Roman Empire, which is where you hear about Charlemagne and all that type of stuff. Well, the Holy Roman Empire would eventually go west and spread Christianity, or should I say Catholicism, to the west. And then on the other side, where you had the Volga, the Persia, right, Iran, or even like Saudi, the people who would become Saudi Arabia, right, Ishmael. You're right. You had the Ishmaelites and their belief. By this time, around the time when all this went down, Islam had been in the world for about 200 years. You had the Christian powers on the west, and you had the Islamic powers on the east. And in between them, you had this pagan culture, right? The Khazarians, which realistically, these were the Amalekites, right? Which were the top tribe of Edom. Because when you get into these people, notice how it's right north of the Caucasus Mountains. Edom had been in the Caucasus Mountains for 1,000 years. Starting around 200 to 400 AD, the pagan Romans, right, the Edomite Romans, white Romans, they started to flee north to the Caucasus Mountains. You see, over 200 years, 300 years, the Israelites that were taken into Rome as slaves eventually came up in the society, became generals, soldiers, and eventually emperors. And when that happened, there really was no more places for Edom and their perverseness. So they eventually got casted out, kind of like what you're seeing right now happening in America and really around the world, right? The spirit started to turn against these Edomites in Rome, and they fled up to the Caucasus Mountains. Well, again, this is what Revelations talks about, how the angel came down with a large chain and bound up the devil for 1,000 years. That's what this is talking about, right? When the Caucasian race went into the Caucasus Mountains, stayed there for 1,000 years, then came out during the 1400s, known as the Caucasians. They went up there, known as the Romans, and they came out referring to themselves as the Caucasians. All the while, they really were the biblical Edomites. Now, back to Khazars. They were surrounded, right, by enemies. Again, these people would, through the religions, because remember, Islam is simply just the knockoff of what Christianity purported to be. Okay? By this time, Christianity was a lot closer to the truth than what it is nowadays, but it still was going off. That being said, both of these religions seen paganism, child sacrifice, magic as wicked, right? Which is what the Bible commands us to do, to hate the wicked and love the good. Well, the Khazarians, and namely their king, Kagan Bulan. Kagan means king, by the way. So Kagan Bulan, their king, he had the foresight to see this and to understand that they had to change their religious affiliations so that way, one, they wouldn't have to be forced to join the Islamists or join the Christians, right? So what did they do? They went out. The story goes, well, in fact, let's read the story. It's down here at the bottom of this, anyways. It says, Bulan was a Kagan king who led the conversion of the Khazars to Judaism in 740 AD. Surrounded by Muslims and Christian forces, being a pagan nation made him a target for invasion. For safety, he decided to convert his kingdom to a neutral belief of Judaism, and since the original Hebrew people were lost, see, by that time, the northern kingdom of Israel, that being the Latinos and Native Americans, we had already come over to the Americas, back in 600 BC. So by this time, it had already been about 1,100 years that the northern kingdom had basically vanished, and the world didn't know where they went, for the most part. Some people did, but remember, news didn't travel fast in these days, and the southern kingdom, the so-called Negroes, they had basically split up. Lot had gone into the slave markets in Rome, like I had said, in 70 AD, and the other ones fled all over the world, but mainly down into Africa on the west coast. And again, by this time, it had already been about 600-700 years since they've been, scattered. So again, the biblical Israelites, for the most part, were lost, and nobody really knew them, right? The southern kingdom of Israel, by this time, they were referring to themselves as Moors. Those Israelites that were captured by the true Africans, the Hamites, and the Ishmaelites, sold into the sub-Saharan slave trade, and eventually took on the religion of their masters, Islam. They then started referring to themselves as Moors, and they went that way. The other ones who went to Rome eventually would go on to conquer Europe, okay? And they would be the nobilities, the bankers, the people. So they were in Europe. So when these people had converted to this religion, or they decided to convert to this heritage, I should say, the original people of the Bible were already lost. They weren't around to claim it. So that's why these people just came on in. Continuing, taking their identity and hiding its pagan rituals and language within the Hebrew characters, which is known as Yiddish, would be easy. So check that out. That's true. See, when these people converted to the heritage of the Israelites and called it Judaism, they also brought their Germanic language, right? And they used the alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet, I should say, our alphabet, but they used their own pronunciations and they added vowels and all this stuff, and they created Yiddish. And that happened. Let's go to the Bible timeline. I don't know, I didn't bring this out earlier, but when you get into the Bible timeline, where is it? It is Kagan Bulan. Normally I see him. Let's see. So 740. Here it goes. Okay. So yeah. So like I was saying, the Quran was created 600. The Judah, the southern kingdom, was calling themselves Moors, and the other ones were just Europeans. And then you had Kagan Bulan, right? 740 AD. He converts all the Khazarian nation to Judaism, right? And what are they practicing? They're practicing the Torah, but eventually they will go on to find the Talmud, right? In the Talmud, you got to go all the way back to 200 AD. Okay, the Talmud, it goes back even further than that. It goes back to the Babylonian captivity, which goes even further back, man, really back. Goes back to where is it? To basically 600 BC, right? When the southern kingdom was taken into captivity into Babylon. Remember, the Babylonians burnt everything, burnt the Bible, the scriptures, everything. And the priests and all the leaders of our nation didn't have the Bible anymore. So what did they do? They started to write our own, laws and basically what they remembered from the Bible, teachings of men, right? The doctrines of men, the laws of men. That's where the Talmud came from. Well, eventually, these devils, after finding trying to learn everything about us, our customs, everything, they found the teachings of the Talmud and they vibed with it. And why is that? Well, because it had Babylonian wickedness mixed in with it, right? It was the thoughts of man. It was the laws of man. So they vibed with it. And this is why, if you know what the Talmud is about, you understand why these people liked it, because it's right up their alley. Well, this is why today, when you meet Amalek and they talk about religion, really the knowledge of that they have is that of the Talmud and not of the actual Bible, right? They'll learn the Bible, but not in the depths that we know it. Okay, they know the Talmud like we know the Bible, and that's actually kind of lying, because they really don't even know the Talmud as well. Okay, the point being is that these devils, this is where they converted, okay? And then, but eventually what would happen is that the people that we know today as the Russians, back then they were known as the Rush. It says in 970 AD, it said the Rush people took down the Khazars 200 years after they converted to Judaism, forcing the Khazars to migrate to East Europe and Spain. So again, these devils, these Edomites, after being taken down by the Russians, which again, the Russians was a mixture of Edom and Japheth, okay? So this is why, let's get back to the map here, because again, the Rush were up here, the Kivian Rush, okay? And these people were basically still the Japhetic nations that were up here, along, and then basically just a mixture of Esau, okay? This is why today the Russians, when you look at the Russian people, there's many people that look like Edomites, but also people that look like Japheth amongst them. Well, the point being is they took down the Khazarians, and that's what caused the Khazarians to be the first that moved into the Europe nation, right? And hence, which would eventually bring the other Edomites, which were still in the Caucasus Mountains, down like after about 300 to 400 years later. Remember, 1200 to 1400 is when the Renaissance took place. Right, in the Renaissance, right, you had man, there's so much stuff that happened, right? The Russian destroys Amalek. Amalek, after being dispersed, or I'm sorry, before being dispersed, this actually should be over on the other side. They created Yiddish, and like I had said, they basically put in, you see these little red dots, these are the vowels, right, that signify which, pronunciation to use, right? This is Yiddish, and that was created by these Edomites that came in and took over our heritage. Well, eventually time goes on, right? The Black Death hits Europe, kills off 1/3 of the population, and that right there allowed, Esau to come on in. Because why? Well, because you see, there was a labor shortage and people shortage in Europe, okay? And this is why when these Edomites would come around, they would do a lot of work. But eventually, just like in Rome, when Jake, coming from the slave markets, eventually rose up and took over, these Edomites did the same thing. They rose up and they took over, okay? And this is what, the Renaissance or rebirth is. It's the rebirth of the Edomite Empire, which is going to be the last empire on earth before the second coming of the Messiah. Okay? Let's read this. This is Ezekiel 36 and 5. Therefore, thus saith Yahweh Bashem Yashayah, surely in the fire of my jealousy have I spoken against the residue of the heathen, and against all Idumea, which have appointed my land into their possession, with the joy of all their heart, with despiteful minds, to cast it out for a prey. So this here is a prophecy that tells us that the land of Israel would eventually one day be conquered by the wicked, that being the nation of Edom. Okay? And to make this even more clear, I like to actually go into the NIV translation of this, because it tells you straight out. Let's read it. This is the Ezekiel 36 and 5 NIV. This is what the sovereign, the Lord, Yahweh, Bashem Yashayah says. In my burning zeal, I have spoken against the rest of the nations and against all Edom. For with glee and with malice in their hearts, they made my land their own possession, so that they might plunder its pasture lands. You see that? There you go. So these devils in the land, it was prophecy that they would steal it. Okay? And that's why all the way back then at 740 AD, the Lord put it on King and Bulan's spirit to have them take over our identity. Right? What did the Lord say? That He would bring us to jealousy by a nation that is no nation? Right? These devils, they took over our identity, and they're ruling the world. And they're doing it in wickedness, right? And they're besmirching our good name, right? They're making everybody think that the Bible and the term Jew and Israel is wicked. But that's because, again, these aren't the correct people. This is Job 20 and 27. The heavens shall reveal his iniquity, and the earth shall rise up against him. Right? This is referring to the wicked of the world, that being first and foremost Amalek, right? And then the rest of the nation of Edom. But for the most part, all Edom. But again, this lesson is specifically talking about Amalek. So what's happening is this could be figuratively and also literally, right? When it says the heavens shall reveal his iniquity, right? Where is a lot of this information gets beamed up to satellites and then gets beamed down to Earth to be broadcasted and shared around the world, okay? Through the internet and all these things, right? So there's that, and not only that, but also the heavens being the whole world in general, okay? People who are just talking, right? They're revealing that these Edomites, or should I say these Israelis, are not the biblical Jews, that they are in fact the imposters that go back to a different people who do not have any claim to that land. And what is that causing? Well, we've seen an example of it in the beginning of this lesson. We had President Bashar al-Assad come out and basically point his finger at them and pretty much telling them they don't belong in that land. And this is also causing other nations to come up and rise up against them. Look at Yemen. Look at all these other nations like Iran who have joined, right? Pretty much you're having all these other heathen nations start to stand up against these Edomites. This is Numbers 24 and 20. And when he looked on Amalek, he took up his parable and said, Amalek was the first of the nations, but his latter end shall be that he perish forever. And this here was a prophecy given by the Moabite prophet, or should I say Moabite shaman, right? Balaam, excuse me, right? He had looked on the nation of Amalek, and he knew that these people would eventually rise up and be the leaders of the world because they are considered like the highest heathen upon the earth, right? Because they're the closest to Jacob, right? And the thing is that he also seen that how they would utterly be destroyed and perish and go extinct. And that's ultimately what this reveals, because the rising up of all these nations is going to ultimately lead to all the nations gathering there in the Valley of Israel, right? As the Bible calls it, the Valley of Jehoshaphat. And that right there will lead to basically Armageddon and the second coming of the Messiah. This is Hebrews 10 and 37. For yet a little while, and he that shall come will come, and will not tarry. So, as Apostle Tahar has coined this year, the hopeful year of Jacob's trouble, everything looks like it's falling in line, Akim. Okay, looks like the last prophecies, Jacob's trouble, the mark of the beast, Armageddon, it's all starting to speed up, and we're all coming to this. As it tells you here, right? Things are not going to tarry, especially the second coming of the Messiah. So again, remember, we're now in 2024, okay? I just remember, we just barely came into 2023, and that's over already. So just imagine how fast 2023 went by. Imagine how fast 2024 and until the time of the Messiah is going to happen. So that being said, we got to stay prayed up, stay focused, and keep doing the work. So hopefully this video was edifying. Until next time, I want to give all honor, glory, and praises to Yahweh, B'Hashem Yashayah, B'Hashem Rakok Radash. Shalom.